Welcome to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. The Invisible Wheelchair Podcast was selected by FeedSpot as one of the top 10 Obsessive Compulsive Disorder podcasts. I'm Donald Grodoff, EFT tapping practitioner and OCD coach at FamilyOCD.com. On the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, I focus on the hidden world of OCD and anxiety with interviews and information around this topic. My purpose is to bring about awareness of OCD, those who treat OCD, and of course, those who suffer with OCD. Obsessive Compulsive Disorder is a treatable and manageable disorder. In my practice at FamilyOCD.com, I guide people through the process of ERP therapy and other alternative treatments. If you know of someone suffering with OCD, simply visit FamilyOCD.com. If you or someone you know suffers or has suffered and recovered from OCD and would like to get their story out, simply contact us through www.invisiblewheelchair.com. We want to talk to you and get your story out on the podcast. Know that the ideas and thoughts presented here are not necessarily those of Family OCD, Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, or Donald Grodoff. We also ask you to take just a few moments and leave comments at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Those comments help us to know what the next topic should be, and we really want to hear from you. Now, let's get to that podcast. This podcast was recorded November 6, 2020. This is podcast number 50. I can't believe it. I made it to 50 podcasts now. Actually, with interviews, it's much higher than that. It's probably at least double that as far as the number of podcasts I've done. But we've reached the number 50 of the ones that I have done myself. And today's podcast is called What to Do, What to Do. Now, since this is coming out in December, I thought about we're going to get ready for holidays and celebrations and joyous celebrations this December. Hopefully, with all that's going on this present year that we're in, now you may be listening to this in the future, but this is 2020 and we are in the middle of a pandemic, so it's going to be a very different holiday. But I wanted to think about and put out for you some ideas of the choices that we have in being able to work on recovering or getting past OCD. So in this podcast, we're going to look at some of the choices, at least the more prominent ones. So I wanted to just talk some about each, starting with ERP, exposure response prevention. It is considered by most in the field as the gold standard for recovery and treatment of OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. And it's really about exposures. And I just recently listened to another podcast where they talked about different types of exposures. There are everyday exposures that we run into on a regular basis, those that have OCD, I should say, run into and have to deal with on a regular basis. And then there are what I call practiced exposures, which we intentionally or on purpose do to be able to get past OCD. So it is one of like I say, the gold standards by the IWC Foundation. So we want to make sure to keep that in our mind. But I want you to think about a couple of things about exposure. For one, I have seen that in some cases, for some people, it doesn't work. I've also seen that in a lot of cases, people don't want to do it because it is very difficult to do. And sometimes we look at things like these everyday exposures And one of the things I just recently had a client that ended up leaving with me because she didn't want to do the work. But one of the things that she was running into was she was getting the everyday, constant, ex- having to do exposures on a regular basis, being triggered constantly. And so this is what I'm going to pose as an idea to you to think about. What I worked with her on and suggested to her was that she concentrate on one, two, or three of those and not worry about the others right now. Now, that really kind of goes against what a lot of other people, other therapists, other organizations say about it. They believe you should be working on all of them. And here's my thought on it, is that with that many, like this particular person I was working with was going through probably 25 to 30 different triggers and trying to do the resistance for every one of them. And she was so worn out by it that she just she wanted to give up on it, and which she did. And my idea was that she concentrates on the big ones first. And I feel like once she got past those, the others would diminish on their own, or not on their own, I should say, but they would be a lot easier to diminish. So it's just a theory, because I feel like um, the distractions are another thing that are a fine line. Sometimes distractions can be good because if it is so intense, you just got to get away from it. But you have to really be careful not to use distractions as an excuse. So now, with this whole idea of talking about the different options that we have, I want to ask you this question for you to think about. So, how would you define the end of it? What would you say you're able to do with OCD at the end when you feel like you're past it? Do you consider it a recovery? Do you consider it managing the OCD? Or do you feel like there is a possibility to cure it? And I won't give you my thoughts on it. I won't give you my opinion on it because I just want to pose that as a thought process for you to be able to think about it. Now, so we talked about the ERP, which is about exposures. It's about the idea, too, that we're really not wanting to get rid of the thoughts as much as we want to get rid of the compulsions or the symptoms. And that once we do that, the thoughts do not carry power over us. And I think that's a good idea. And that leads me to the next option that we have, and that is the ACT therapy, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, which most people, most therapists, most organizations I've talked to combine ACT with ERP and make the two together. And with this, with ACT, which I think is very powerful, I've used the idea of acceptance in my practice with EFT quite a bit. In fact, probably for a long time before I even knew what ACT was. But in this, it's talking about the same kind of principle, is that it's not about the thought as it is about the actions you take. And that instead of trying to fight the thoughts, you accept them to be able to get past them. And that you know, eliminate the symptoms or um, the compulsions. So you got ERP, and then you've got people that add ACT into ERP. And of course, like I say, I am not trained in ACT, so I don't know it, but I know that I have tried it and worked with acceptance in my own practice with the EFT, and it does make a big difference because instead of pushing down or fighting your thoughts or distracting from the thoughts, you're actually allowing them and going through them and changing the whole perspective around it. It seems to fit very closely and very well with ERP. Now, I'll add in the next option, and that's EFT, Emotional Freedom Techniques, which is my practice of what I do, but I have known therapists that use it as part of ERP and part of CBT in the therapies for obsessive compulsive disorder. So what I have done is be able to bring in the EFT, the tapping, emotional freedom techniques tapping, into the process of ERP. So in other words, as they go through these exposures, of course, they are intense. They get anxiety comes up, and so what I do is I stop the pattern right there and tap through the anxiety to bring it down. Because with anything, if you can get the anxiety down on something, then it makes any kind of treatment better. And that's my goal, is bringing the anxiety down on it so that we can work through it in some way, shape, or form, like ERP or ACT or some of these other things. And so I put in the ERP. I use acceptance. I'm not an ACT therapist, but I do use acceptance policies or procedures in there with what I do. And then on top of that, the tapping. So it's a three-tiered process. Now, one other option that I came across, in fact, it'll be on, the interview will be on this month's interview podcast in a couple of weeks, which is this technique this lady is doing in Ireland using Kundalini yoga and breathing techniques to literally change the nervous system. And she has one that's specific to OCD, that works specifically on OCD. And she says that she's had some pretty big results with it. So that'll be coming up in the second part of it. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot because I'm still learning about it myself. And of course, there is the option of medication that plays a role in really all of this. If you find a therapist that is open to being able to use all possibilities, that may be one of them too. We even did another option, I just thought about that we did that I hadn't mentioned, was hypnotherapy. And it did have some effect. We used it with my daughter. Now, I have not done it extensively with anybody else. I'm not a hypnotherapist. But it did have some results. And I believe, again, with all of these options, that it's how you combine them, how you mesh them together, that can be a different plan for each different person, because they all work in different ways. And so it's a matter of finding which of this combination of different things works and helps you. Another option that we have gone to ourselves personally is a developmental specialist that works with sensitivities, sensory issue problems and issues. And we have found some results in that also. Another option is occupational therapy. Now, my wife is an occupational therapist, and she doesn't treat kids, but we have worked with our kids with that, and it too has some benefits. Those are the major ones, and I would love comments on anybody that knows other ones, because I would like to delve into them, get them up here on the podcast, to know that we have the blessings of choices, some choices in this, some methods. Through this opening up and more ways and choices, we also open up advocacy, and we open up the getting it out there message about OCD, which is what I'm trying to do. Like I said, I definitely would like to hear about any other methods out there for dealing with OCD, for handling it. And again, I pose the question, do you consider it as recovery? Do you consider it as it's manageable now? Or do you consider that it's gone, that you're cured? Have you had those kind of incidences yourself? Have you gone through it and feel like it's gone? That you are having to continually manage it, and that you're in a recovery stage? That it has returned a couple of times in the time that you've had it? Those are some things I'm posing that I would love comments on. I'd love to get the information on, because I'd love to pull it up here and interview the people that are doing it and get it out there for everybody to find out about it. Because if it works, if there's a method out there that works, then I want to be able to get it out for others to use, because we're all different. It's just like I feel like with my practice, some people I work with, some people it just doesn't work for them. It's not me. It's not the connection. It doesn't work. We want to be able to know, and it may be a factor of experimenting. That's what we had to do. We had to look at quite a few things. So there are options that work in combination. And that's what I want you to be able to I want to put out there for you to think about. These are the things that might have some effect, that might do some work for you. These are, again, to put out there as just things to think about. Not saying that any one of them is the right one for you, not telling you which ones should be the ones you work with, but to know some of these options out there. And again, I ask for anybody to add in any further options to it that they think of by giving me a comment on it. Coming back to the invisiblewheelchair.com website and put a comment there about what you have done and how it has worked for you. I want to wish everyone a joyous and happy holiday season, for whatever joyous celebration you're going to go through, whatever style, whatever way, especially in this time we're in right now with the pandemic. I hope that you can find ways to be able to connect in a joyous way with someone you love and with people you care about and love. Happy holidays, and take care. This concludes this podcast. We really would appreciate your comments. Simply leave a comment at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. There, you're able to submit a comment that will help us determine future podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email Don at invisiblewheelchair.com. Remember, there is a corresponding tapping recording for each of the podcasts, with the exception of the interview podcast. You can find these tapping recordings and archive past podcasts at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Finally, there is relief for OCD, and we at FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com can help you find that relief. Again, you can contact us through those sites, FamilyOCD.com or FocusedHealthyFamily.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at InvisibleWheel1, that's the number 1, or at FamilyOCD. So thank you for listening. Keep tapping and transcending your life to new heights.